Katie Merrill. I'm the Director of Admissions for Vermont Law School. Welcome for our information session on our Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, CAFS, as we like to call it. I'm so pleased to have our director, Professor Beyranevand, and I have students joining us today, Lindsay, Lauren, and Olivia. So we'll get an overview and then you can hear what our students are doing and what they're taking and where they're from. A lot of exciting stories, and everybody's from everywhere, so this is wonderful. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a poll about your interest in food and agriculture law and policy. So we'll see kind of what comes up. Can you guys see it? I'm not seeing the polling. Oh, here it comes. Here it comes. Wow. And you can select more than one. All right, I'll give that another few minutes. Oh, I think some people are going to be taking your course, Professor Beyranevand. Let's see, we'll give it a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to end polling. I'm going to share the results. All right, so looks like, wow, federal food policy and regulation. I know. And you know what I love? This climate smart agriculture. And I did not actually ever think that was an aspect in a sense. So I'd be interested to hear more about that. All right. So I am going to stop sharing results and I am going to hand it over to Professor Beyranevand.
Hi, everyone. I thought I was going to be able to see you, so it feels a little weird not to see everyone. My mistake, but it's nice to be with you.
Lori, I can promote people to panelists. Would you like that? So you can have some.
Oh, yeah, I would love that,
Okay,
actually.
I'll go ahead and do that. So while you start, I'll go ahead and promote those to panelists, and then you all can turn on your cameras.
That's awesome. Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome.
So hi, everyone. I'm Laurie Beyranevand. I'm the director of the Center for Ag and Food Systems. I'm also a professor at BLS. And actually have had all of these wonderful women in various classes. Lauren and Olivia are both in my food regulation and policy class right now. I haven't seen Lindsay for a little bit since the quarantine, so it's nice to see her today too. So I know one thing that Katie was hoping I would talk with you about. I'm an alum of BLS, so I'll talk a little bit with you all about my journey to law school. It's a long and winding road. So I'll try to give you all the shortcut of how I got there. I grew up in New Jersey. My parents have I don't normally talk about how my parents met, although we've been doing a project focused on farm worker public health and talking a lot about immigration, and it has made me talk to my dad a bit more about his journey to the United States from Iran and why he wound up in rural Kentucky and how he worked as a dishwasher in New York City in the summer, basically to pay his way through college, which is a sort of a random journey that he had, but a connection to the food system. My mom grew up in Appalachia in Kentucky, and they didn't have a farm, but had an acre of land. And she and her sisters all had a cow, and they raised a lot of their own food, actually. So in a lot of ways, I think my dad winding up in rural Kentucky probably felt a lot like Iran in some ways, in the sense that the food system was pretty integral to where he was. And even though he was in a city, he was used to being able to buy things directly from farmers, which was an experience that he also had in college. So it's fun to hear about some of that from him. I'm the first person in my family to go to law school. So it was pretty exciting when I started applying to law school. They were probably more excited about that than I was. And I knew that I wanted to focus on, or I thought I wanted to focus on environmental law. So I only applied to the schools that had environmental programs, which at the time, it's a lot of the same ones that you think about now. So PACE, BLS, Lewis and Clark. And then I applied to Rutgers because I went to Rutgers and was like, I should just apply for the sake of applying. And I visited all of those schools, not Rutgers because I had been there before. And VLS, the first time I visited VLS was a snowstorm. This is the story that Katie loves. And actually the students were still out on winter break and there was no one around. And it was a pretty crazy snowstorm actually. And I have a picture that my friend took of me visiting, giving VLS 2 thumbs down. Cause I was like, there's no way that I can possibly go to this school. And then I visited Pace and I visited Lewis and Clark and I came back to BLS because I was like, I don't know, something about those schools doesn't feel totally right to me. And I visited BLS in the springtime and it was a totally different experience. The students were around, the professors were around. I got to sit in some classes, the sun was shining, the grass was green. And VLS really just tugged at my heartstrings. And so I wound up taking a year off and then going to BLS. I focused on environmental law while I was there. And then I worked in the South Royalton Legal Clinic, which provides free legal services on a whole host of issues. And I worked on a Social Security case and a child custody case. And one thing I realized was that I really liked working directly with people and engaging in legal services. So what I found out about myself was that I didn't think I necessarily wanted to work in government or some sort of legal profession where I wasn't regularly interacting with clients. So after I graduated, I worked for a judge for a year and then came back to Vermont and worked for Vermont Legal Aid. And in that job, I focused on access to healthcare and some civil rights cases for individuals with disabilities, some special education cases. I had like a pretty wide ranging caseload. And what I realized about my interest in environmental law was that I was interested in environmental law because of public health. And so public health really became the thing that I was interested in focusing on. A lot of people come at environmental law from a lot of different perspectives, whether it's conservation or animals. I was really focused on environmental impacts to humans and how we treat our environment, how that winds up impacting communities and impacting health. And so then I started to get a lot more interested in the food system. And that wasn't really an area that we focused on at BLS. When I was a student, there weren't classes where you could think about the human health impacts of the food system. And that was, so when I started teaching, that was really where I wanted to focus my research. And then we started the Center for Ag and Food Systems and sort of built a whole program around that. So that was really exciting. And that's sort of where I landed. So now I'm the director. I would say as a center, we have a pretty heavy focus on equity and justice. Partially, I think, that's always been a passion and interest of mine, but the people that work in the center are all similarly focused, and we all have different sort of angles. So Molly McDonough, who's our wonderful communications person, put together the poll for you, and that has a whole host of different issues that we cover. It doesn't mean that we're all experts in all of those areas, and we don't all pretend to be, but we have wide-ranging interests, which I think is really great because students get exposed to a number of different things. And federal policy, federal food policy is really an area that I tend to focus on. The class that Lauren and Olivia are in right now is all federal policy. Basically, we talk a bit about state policy to fill in gaps, but it's all federal policy for the most part. So let me think what else would be helpful for me to talk about. I guess the center. Katie, you want me to talk a little bit about the center? So we have a master's degree. And then we also we are a grant funded center. So we do a lot of project work. I mentioned a project that we're working on right now that's focused on farm worker public health. We are partnered with Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future to do that project. So it's a fun project in the sense that it's the public health side of Johns Hopkins. So they've been focused on the public health aspects of heat stress and pesticide exposure for farm workers. And then we've been focused on federal law and state law that addresses those issues. So together, we're going to put together a report that has a public health side and that also has a law and policy side. So that's one example of some of the projects that we focus on. We also recently, over the summer and then into the fall, worked with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic to write an update to a project that we had created called A Blueprint for a National Food Strategy. And we just released our urgent call for a national food strategy that was an update to that report that we wrote several years ago. So we had students work with students at the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. Those are two examples of projects where we have academic partners. I would say most of our projects our partners are people that are working in the food system or organizations working in the food system. And then we help to create either resources for them or provide some sort of law and policy assistance to them. So if you take a look at our website, there's a whole host of projects that are listed that cover a bunch of the different subject matter areas that were in the poll that you saw. Katie was talking about climate, smart agriculture. One of the projects that our students are working on in our food and ag clinic right now is related to payment for ecosystem services. And they did a whole research project and are going to present that to a group of stakeholders and then possibly the Vermont legislature. So that's a pretty exciting project for them to be working on. And the clinic is basically a way to access the projects that we work on. So students enroll in the clinic, they're able to work on those projects. Sometimes we have students work on them as research assistants rather than working in the clinic. I'm sure when Lauren talks to you all, she'll talk to you about how she loved the clinic so much that she did it twice. And now has become an expert on food safety. So I think I'll stop there because I feel like I've been talking for a long time, but I'm happy to answer any questions after you all have a chance to hear from everybody else.
Thank you, Laurie. Lauren, would you like to pick up from there? Talk about your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll give you guys a brief intro to my background and then talk a little bit about my work in the food clinic. So I grew up in Farmington, Minnesota on my family's farm. It's a small acreage, only 13.5 acres. We mostly do, and we also have a flock of sheep. So I have relocated there my second year of law school, and I'm now finishing law school from my family farm, which is not something I would have ever expected. And I got really interested in food systems from that background. So I did my undergrad in mostly looking at plant biology, and ended up during my undergrad doing work in the Peruvian Amazon on sustainable palm forest management before I then went to do a master's in geography, also doing research on more broadly agricultural livelihoods in the Peruvian Amazon and how they adapt to environmental change. And through that research, I got very interested in the influence of international supply chains on farmers' livelihoods and sustainable land use. And that's what brought me to law school. I did in the legal and policy mechanisms of how we shape our food system for a long time, and was delighted to find the Center for Ag and Food Systems at Vermont Law School when I was looking at schools. So VLS was the only school I applied to because I specifically wanted to work with CAFS and I wanted to work in the food law clinic. And here I am now about to graduate in May, having done both of those. So I worked in the food law clinic during my second year. If you're coming in for a JD, you have to go through your first year of all of the basics and you can't do clinic work during your first year. So you wait until your second year before you can do that more experiential based work. And I probably, like many of you, if I had been given this poll as I entered law school, I would not have ranked food safety as one of my primary interests in food and agriculture until I showed up at Vermont Law School and learned about this huge law that was passed in 2011 through Congress called the Food Safety Modernization Act. And it's the biggest change in the way that the federal government regulates our food and agricultural system in 70 years. For the first time ever, they started actually regulating on-farm practices for the production of fresh fruits and vegetables, saying things like, you have to test your agricultural water quality at least once a year. You have to limit the kinds of compost that you can put on your fields if you're going to be selling commercially. And although there's a requirement that those requirements only directly apply to large farms and like huge production facilities for fresh fruits and vegetables, the way that it actually works in the market is likely to have an impact on small farmers as well, just through what then purchasers would be requiring for anyone who's selling fresh fruits and veggies in the market. So I got very hyped about food safety during my 2L year. I ended up looking at, there's visions of flexibility that were built in that farmers can use to provide an alternative to the requirements. And then there's this kind of nebulous pathway that states, foreign governments, and federally recognized tribes can petition the Food and Drug Administration for a variance from certain requirements. So I delved into those particular provisions for the entirety of my 2L year, ended up turning it into a paper, coming on with the Food Law Clinic as an advanced clinician in the spring to dive into that even further. And then am actually just this weekend submitting that paper for publication in a journal. So I'll have my first publication out of the deal, which I'm very excited about. And it's been a great jumping off point. I love how the classes that I've taken, especially I'm doing the joint degree for the JD and the Master's in Food and Agriculture Law and Policy. So during the summer of my 1L year, instead of doing an internship, I took the master's courses, which was great specific content knowledge about global food security, international trade and the environment, and the Farm Bill, where we did a very deep dive into this huge omnibus legislation that touches every piece of our food system. And it was also great networking. So I still reach out to those professors probably once a semester to just say, hey, I'm still trying to figure out jobs. That's what I'm thinking now. I've kind of changed my idea since the last time we talked. How about I look in this direction? And it's been a wonderful place to delve into these legal and policy interests, figure out where to take them. And I feel very well equipped as I head out of school at some point during 2021.
Thank you, Lauren. It's so good to see you. Lindsay.
Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay. So great to see some of you. Thank you for joining. I'm just gonna warn that I am currently in somewhat rural New Mexico, and so my internet might be a little dodgy. Bear with me. But my path, I'll just overview real quick. My path going into law school was not anything that I ever foresaw happening to me. I loved culinary arts. I thought I was going to go become a chef. I ended up loving, hey, another New Mexican, let's go. I ended up loving like the chemistry of food, and I went to go study nutrition and food studies, and that like very quickly spiraled into like understanding food law and policy and understanding like the significance of food law that affects agriculture, food system, food access, nutrition, all of the above. And again, never thought I was going to go to law school. I thought that I was going to either work in kitchens or work in farmers markets and things like that. My senior year, I started getting really interested in human rights. And I wrote my undergraduate thesis on developing a national food policy through a human rights framework. And that just introduced me to all of the research that Laurie Beyranevand was doing. And that was really the first time I was like, whoa, I could go to law school, because having like a legal education is incredibly powerful if you want to ultimately do work in food, mainly because there's not that many people that are trained lawyers that are ultimately pushing law and policy forward. So I decided to apply to law schools that only had certain food programs. And VLS just always stood out to me. It has obviously the whole Center for Agriculture and Food Systems. It has the clinic program. It has a master's. Not only all of that, but I realized the value for me was to go to a school where there were other students that really wanted to study this stuff. So for me, like the biggest value out of coming to VLS was meeting people like Lauren, who is now one of my absolute best friends. And I just call her all the time to bounce off like different food policy ideas, which is not something I ever thought I would do. But there's a lot of students at VLS, interestingly, that have like really different backgrounds and really different interests in food and ag. You know, Lauren comes from a farm background. I come from more of like a food security, food access, and health background. And so it's just been really interesting being in like an array of food focused classes and like working in the food and agriculture clinic with people with those different backgrounds, but still like being in a, like, I acknowledge it's a pretty niche community because there's only really about 10 law schools that that have any focus on food and ag. So it's been exciting. I did the clinic as well, my 2L, fall of 2L year. And I was also on the FSMA program, the FSMA team with Lauren. I was definitely not as enthusiastic about it as she was. I didn't stay on for a second. I didn't stay on for a second semester, but I sort of dove into other things. So I've gotten really interested in like organics, diversion, and different composting programs. So I've sort of launched like a whole project this last year for VLS that's looking into the impact of a recent law that Vermont passed, which is called Act 148. It's a landfill ban. And so our program basically looks at like, okay, how many residents understand that it is now illegal to throw your food scraps into landfill? And how many, how many people are composting at home? How many are bringing it to a transfer station? What kind of organic waste? So again, not anything I was ever considering when I went to law school. And now I've sort of gotten really deep into organics diversion laws. And as I take that now going out of law school, it's like, wow, between the CAFS clinic, between the classes, between just the community of people that I've gained at VLS, I'm prepared, definitely, but I think more so like I'm really excited to do the work that I want to do. And I credit that a lot to this program. So happy to answer any questions, any doubts. I'm certainly your girl for that. And pass it on to Olivia then, I guess.
Yes, please. Thank you. Olivia.
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia. I'm currently a Master's of Food and Agriculture Law and Policy student at Vermont Law School. So I'm not in the JD program, but I take a lot of the same courses. And it's been a really interesting experience so far. I did my undergraduate at Hampshire College, which is a very different learning model to switch to a test-based one like Vermont Law School, but all the teachers have been so fantastic and all the classes have just been so interesting, and there's so many opportunities to integrate yourself into all the exciting activities that have been happening on campus, even in online times. And so this semester I have been working as a research assistant with CAFS, and I've been working on a project with the National Gleaning Association. And for those of you who don't know, gleaning is just an act of rescuing surplus food from farms and grocery stores and then bringing that to redistribution sites so that it can be utilized by those who are food insecure. And so I've been working for the past few weeks on a project with them. I think we're updating the comprehensive report, and so we're just updating the data and stuff for that now. But so far it's been a really fantastic opportunity that I've been really grateful for. And I don't have too much experience to say on it as I've just been working on it a few weeks, but it's been a really enjoyable project to work on. A lot of the stuff that CAFS has done has been really interesting to me, and I'm really interested in food sustainability and security. And so I think that a lot of the classes here and a lot of the opportunities that they have outside of classes are really great for both building skills that you want to and looking deeper into interests that you have, but also in expanding them and doing things that you might have never considered before.
Thank you, Olivia. All right. Well, I was wondering if we have any questions. I have one. I was thinking in the center, and here's another. Oh, here's the gleaning project that Molly just put in. The effects of COVID. Have you seen projects come in with regards to the effects of COVID and agriculture and food security? Laurie?
Yes. We have. So we have, and actually, we've had some of our projects that have specifically, they sort of pivoted so that they could provide resources related to COVID. So one of our longer standing projects is the Healthy Food Policy Project. And that project, for those of you who are interested in food access and food security, that project is focused on access to healthy food at the local level. So it really looks at the capacity of municipalities and towns and communities to think about how they can create ordinances or how they can create tools like that to be able to increase access to healthy foods. And that project specifically at the time of COVID started a COVID database where they started collecting policies that municipalities and towns were passing directly in response to COVID. A lot of it had to do with like letting things be more flexible. So redirecting food that might have been going to restaurants, like trying to figure out how to allow for differences in labeling and things like that so that that food could somehow get redirected and redistributed. Some of it was like zoning changes and things like that. But that was a project that sort of like immediately started collecting policies related to COVID. Our blueprint project, when we were working on that over the summer, that's another area where when we were writing the update to the blueprint, we knew that there was an election. We thought maybe there might be a change in administration, although we weren't totally sure. And one thing that we wanted to really hit on was how COVID impacted the food system, because at the time, you know, so many people were seeing pictures in the newspaper of these long lines of people waiting to get food or grocery store shelves that were totally empty. And And then like really sad articles about meatpacking workers that were contracting COVID at really high rates, or farm workers that were getting COVID at really high rates because of the lack of personal protective equipment. So that was an area that we really we focused on in that report, and how we thought that if there had been a more coordinated, if we had a more coordinated framework to address the food system, it might have been easier to respond to some of those things more quickly as they were happening during COVID. So those are a couple of examples of things that we focused on.
Thank you. I've had a first couple of questions about the difference between the online and the in-person program. I know we've been online for a year, but can you talk a little bit about that? Specifically, what is the difference between your online and on-campus programs? Do you lose anything from being online?
Yeah, I'm not saying yeah you lose anything. I'm just saying yeah to answer the question. We are all online now, so that feels really confusing when people are like, is it an online class or is it a class that's online? The online classes, the online program is fully asynchronous. I'm not sure if that's going to change over time and if there will be more synchronous opportunities. But the reason that it was created that way was basically to allow for students from all over the world in all different time zones who may have work obligations, that might not be able to get on a class at 11 a.m. or whatever the case may be. It was essentially intended to give them a lot of flexibility to be able to do those classes. So what that means, though, is that you don't ever do stuff like this, where people are all together in one space at one time. And so if that's something that you like, then you would miss out on an opportunity like that if you do the online program. I know that historically online students haven't participated in the clinics, although that also is starting to change. So we just recently had a meeting about the online program, and I know some of the clinics are trying to incorporate online students into the work of the clinics. So I anticipate that even though that's happened historically, that's going to start to change. I'd say the other major difference is that the professors aren't necessarily the same. So you may have different professors in the online program just depending on their availability, but the professors that are in the online program are all really incredible. So, and some of them are people that adjunct in the summertime too. So you would just be having them at a different time of year than you might otherwise. Other than that, I mean, you know, right now as an online student, I don't think it's that different than being a residential student. And I hope that when we move back to really being residential, that a lot of the student events and when we have people on campus, that there will be more access for the online students. I think we started moving in that direction, but I suspect we'll go even further in that direction to be more inclusive. So I would say, you know, those are some of the only differences, and it's nice there's a residency requirement. So at some point as an online student, you come on campus, which I think is great because it's nice to get the feel of what VLS is. We try to recreate that online, but I think it's hard to do. So it's nice just to come on campus and feel what VLS feels like.
If I could just follow up on that, I would say that there isn't a ton of difference in classes between being a virtual residential student, I think is how we're technically called, and then being an actual residential student on campus. What you do miss out a bit on the, you know, non-school stuff and opportunities to connect with other students, but I would love to give a shout out to the Food and Agriculture Law Society, of which Lindsay, Olivia, and I are all members, but it's a student group that's for anyone interested in food and agricultural law. And we tend to meet every other week, and we host events and we bring in speakers to meetings, and try and have a lot of good conversations about topics that are in the news or things that we're learning in classes. And we tend to send out events that are coming up that are of interest across the listserv. So I've found that that's probably my strongest connection, aside from my like random friendships with people I'm not in a student group with. But the people I see most regularly are everybody from the Food and Ag Law Society.
Thank you. Amanda Staples asked the resident requirement for online students. There's not necessarily one, but we offer a summer session. So when we are residential, a lot of students might want to come for 2 weeks and take a 2-week block course. It's fun. It's great in the summer. And our online students sometimes will use those 2 weeks as their vacation, and it's a good aspect. I have another questions about the difference between a master's and a JD program. Do you want to touch on that, Laurie?
Sure. So the JD program, so Lauren and Lindsay both, I think Lindsay, you're also a joint degree, right? No. Lauren is a joint degree. So Lauren is getting her JD and the master's in food and ag. I mean, you know, the biggest difference between the JD and the master's is just they're two different degrees. The JD, you have to go for 3 years. The master's is 3 semesters, basically. So I like to say it's a year, but it feels a little different than a year. And students typically do fall, spring, summer for the master's degree. In terms of like what the big distinctions are, I mean, if you get a JD, then you're able to sit for the bar exam. You could sit for the bar exam in Vermont without a JD if you wanted to. You just have to go through some hoops and do some clerkships with attorneys to be able to do that. In terms of the classes, the food and ag focused classes, you have access to those as a master's student, just as you would as a JD. So like Olivia said, she's in classes with JD students like Lauren. So Lauren and Olivia are in the same class together with me. So the class offerings, there are some differences in requirements, obviously. For the JD students, you have to take a full year of things that are not focused at all on food and ag and are all things that you need to know for the bar exam. So they're very important, but they're not focused on food and ag at all. And the master students have a different set of requirements that they need to take. But in terms of like having access to the food and ag program, I would say that the access is the same. As a master's student, you can enroll in the food and ag clinic. You can be an RA like Olivia is and work on projects in a less formal way than being in the clinic. You can take the food and ag focus classes and the upper level electives. So I'd say that that's sort of, you know, there's not a lot of difference except that you're getting a different degree for a different amount of time. And maybe that limits your options in some ways. Although I think some of the master's students that have thought of getting the JD, my advice to them is always, and Katie, close your ears, but my advice is always to start with a master's degree and see where it takes you, because it's possible that the master's degree gets you everything that you want to be able to do. You can work as a policy analyst, you can work on policy, you can do all of those things without getting a JD. But, you know, if you love law school, which some people, I did, you may decide that you want to keep going and you want to be a lawyer and you want to be able to do things that lawyers do. But my advice for students who are sort of on the fence about it is to get the master's and see where it takes you before you commit to the JD. And then you can always decide later that you want to get the JD also and continue on in your studies.
And I'm also can help you. Oh, Lindsay, I was going to say I can also help you in that journey decide, because I'd rather have you be happy in your decisions. Lindsay?
Yes, I just wanted to share a little bit of a different perspective. So every single law school that I applied for any program had a JD, and then also either had like a master's something in agriculture and food or a master's in public health. So I very much so applied to law school with this mission of a dual degree. Fast forward to today, I actually, kind of going back to the last question, I didn't love the online learning format at all. And I think it's can vary a lot like on what professors you have. Some professors are fantastic at transitioning online and others were rough. And granted, like we also transitioned really quickly. But so I actually decided to like merge all of my credits from the master's into the JD, and I sort of like surprise graduated in January. And it was a difficult decision because like I obviously came to VLS and like food and ag was my focus, and I really sort of always wanted that master's program. But I realized for me, as someone that had already like a good amount of experience in food and ag, I had worked in the clinic, I had different kind of experiences. I realized that like finishing that master's might not have been as valuable for me as other students. But there I have a lot of peers that don't have that background, that I think like the master's is really, really important for them because it shows, one, it puts them into those classes that they may not be familiar with otherwise, but it also sort of like boosts up their resume to show like, look, I spent a lot of time and I'm qualified in this degree. So I do think that it can depend like on each person. I will say for myself, I'm really glad that I decided to go to law school first, as opposed to going to like a public health or food law master's and then law school, because law school is more difficult. It's always easier to do law school first and then get the easier degree than, I say that easier, but like Olivia knows, she's in all of the law classes. Like it's not easy. It's not easy at all. But for me, like I saw that as valuable because ultimately, like when I graduate, and yes, now I'm going to take the bar, and I sort of committed my life to becoming an attorney that I never expected. But I realized that there are like more career opportunities for what I want to do, to having gone down like that law path, as opposed to the master's. So again, I just think it depends like a lot on what you want to do and sort of like what your background is already.
Olivia, would you like to weigh in? And we do throw our master students in. Like, hi, here's a JD program. Woo! And you hold your own.
Yeah, so I came from Hampshire College. I saw in the chat there was a question about it, and they don't do any testing or grades. And so before coming to law school, which I think a lot of people know is pretty test intensive as a measure of kind of how you're doing and stuff, it was just kind of a switch, but I felt like all of the teachers really made that switch very easy. And for me, I decided not to pursue a JD program yet because I'm not entirely sure that I want to go into something law-based. And I think that there may be more opportunities for me sooner as a master's student. And then I think there is plenty of time if I do want to go back and get that JD. But I think, like Lindsay said, it really depends what you're hoping to do after you get your degree. And so for some people that might be working in law, doing a JD program. And for some people that's just the master's program, and then maybe working with more grounds roots organizations and stuff like that.
In watching the students, we are very, very flexible. So some students start with a JD and then they add a master's. Some students have a JD and they want to do a dual degree, and then they decide, oh, I'm going to continue with, I'm not going to continue. Some of my masters just do the master, some go on to do the JD, and it all works with our career services, and they work with you individually what your end goals are. So if you, let's say you are really dedicated to policy, 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 and creating policy, you don't necessarily need a JD. But then once those policies are enacted and no one's following through, like Lindsay, like how many people are actually following through? Is the state of Vermont following through on Act 148? I think it is, correct? Okay. Then that's when maybe you do want to be a lawyer, because maybe you're going to sue the state of Vermont. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, and there's a lot of different ways you can tailor your career, and that's where we do the one-on-one flexible. It's really about you and what your needs are. And a master. Okay, chefs. We love chefs. We are, even if you're not in the food and ag department, we are grounded in farming, and their little farms are surrounding the campus, and food, and everyone cooks. And even online we all cook. Professor Beyranevand, I know that you cooked online with some students, and it's just such an important part. Yes, if you are a chef and you want to come and do our master's program, it would probably be ideal to start with the master's program. I don't think you're limited by having a career as a chef. And I am going to say that my son was admitted into the Culinary Institute of America. His dad's a chef. So I don't know. Laurie, I don't think you know this, but he also was admitted to Lewis and Clark undergrad. So he's got his hippie mom, like Pacific Northwest, and his chef dad. So I don't know what he's going to end up doing, but I know that law school attracts all sorts of different types, especially Vermont law, because I feel like we're an advocacy institute and we are advocating for food safety, food justice, all those things along those lines. Let's see. I have had extensive experience in farming back here in Nigeria, and I'm keen at becoming. I know I've talked to you. I can talk to you a little bit more about financial aid. So a fellowship is you apply, and then there's certain scholarships available. What does the Vermont Law School student body look? Oh, okay. So I think we all can talk about where you're from. 95% of my students are from out of state, and they come from across the country, everywhere. Lindsay, Lauren, or Olivia, do you want to speak on that, on the diversity of our student body?
I mean, I'm from Arizona, and I've met plenty of West Coast people. I've met people from France here. I've met people from all over the East Coast. It's a pretty diverse group here.
Yeah, I'll echo that. As I said before, I'm from Minnesota. I did my master's in Montreal at McGill. There's people from all over the country. So one of the fun things about events at the Food and Ag Law Society is that we're all generally coming from very different backgrounds, and can compare, well, that's not how agriculture works in my part of the country. Oh, that would never fly. It's way too arid where I live. So yeah, it's been a great opportunity to meet people from all over the country.
That's my favorite part. Even though we're a small, little, tiny law school in Vermont, everybody comes from everywhere. So it's a really unique group of students and faculty and staff. I like this question. What is the vegan community like in and around Vermont law? Well, there's a lot of vegans. Does anyone want to speak on that? Laurie, I think, are you vegan or?
I dabble in veganism. I fluctuate back and forth. I have 2 little kids, and we eat a lot of cheese. Cheese is really my Achilles heel. And we're able to get a lot of great cheese in Vermont. There's a lot of really good cheese here. So I would say there's a ton of vegans. I think a lot of we're not on campus right now, but there's a lot of vegan options on campus, a lot of student events. There are always vegan options. I know when we have any kind of food for CAFS, we're really conscious of that and making sure that we have vegan options for students. So I would say in my class, last year, my food reg and policy class, one big issue was like thinking about the labeling of plant-based products and whether they could say that they were meat. And we talked about that a lot. And we had a lot of vegans in our class that semester. So I would assume I haven't talked to students as much lately because we haven't had a lot of events where there have been food. So I don't know what their preferences are, but I would assume that we probably still have a lot of vegans, and we have a lot of students that are vegan for a lot of different reasons. But because we have such a heavy emphasis on environment, there are a lot of students that are vegan for environmental reasons too.
Yeah.
Katie, I was just going to say, I don't know if someone asked specifically about chefs, but I think, is there someone on the line that's a chef?
Yes.
Oh, cool. We had a student who, this was several years ago, but he was a master's student who worked with like a number of big restaurants in New York, and worked with a restaurant group. And he actually focused a lot on food safety. So he became our kind of like resident expert on Serve Safe and all the things that are required for restaurant workers, which was awesome. Like he was such a great resource. And he then went on to work for the USDA and their food safety inspection service. And then after that got a job with Mars, actually. So I would say there's certainly a place for chefs. Chefs have really interesting perspectives from so many different aspects. You know, there's like the food safety aspect, there's the treatment of workers, there's like so many different things that are going on at the restaurant level, and certainly things that we touch on. So yes, absolutely, there are places for chefs and anyone in the food system and anyone just that eats food.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Here's a question from Brenna. How have students been able to translate their clinical experiences and skills to their careers?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, Lauren and Lindsay, you both are welcome to talk about this too. I would say we have a fair amount of students who have actually gone on to work with organizations that we've partnered with in the clinic. So the sort of like direct connection with that organization or entity or person has led to a career. But generally speaking, I think a lot of that also depends on what it is that you hope to get out of the clinic. Sophia Khrushchevsky, who's the director of the clinic, works with students really closely to try to figure out what their goals are. So like, what are the skills that you're hoping to get out of the clinic, and what is it that you're hoping to be able to learn? And then tries to figure out how to match a project with a student, both in terms of substance. Like some students are like, I'm so desperate to work on like this particular topic. And assuming we have that type of project in the clinic, then like that's one reason why a student might work on a project. But it also might be the skill set. Like if a student really is interested in learning about researching and writing policy, and we have a policy project in the clinic, then that would be a project that the student would go work on. They can take whatever they've produced as a result of that semester and have that as a writing sample and talk about the experience that they had in the clinic. So I would say, like, of all the things that students do, the experiential opportunities that you have in the clinic are really so valuable in terms of being able to talk about what you've learned skills wise and substance wise with prospective employers.
I'll just hop in to echo that and say that career services was so wonderful with trying to figure out internships. So I externship last fall, and then a summer internship for my master's last year. So starting in like August of 2019, even before that, they started meeting with me, figuring out what good options were, help me network, help me get in touch with people in DC, because I was looking entirely at DC. I ended up, to give you an idea of the types of positions I was looking at, I was on a short list for a 6-month legal fellowship with the US Senate Committee on Agriculture. I was looking at internship with the USDA Office of, at least had my application in for a position with the USDA Office of General Counsel and the FDA Office of Policy. All of those programs got canceled due to COVID-19, so it didn't work out. But that was the kind of places that they were able to help me look for internships and externships. And there was an amazing network of VLS people to connect with in the food and ag field who are doing incredible experience in the private industry, in federal government, in different state agencies. So it's been a really fruitful opportunity to do a bunch of networking and turn all those connections into then, okay, so I'm not doing an internship anymore because that didn't happen, but how about a job? So that's the process I'm currently in.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to this as well. I think my clinic experience was probably the most valuable experience I had at VLS to prepare me to work. Prior to coming to VLS, you know, all of my jobs were in restaurants, community gardens, farms, farmers markets, like that. So, and like nonprofits. So I didn't really have like a lot of that, I guess, career focused experience. And when you're working in a clinic, it's awesome because you have a supervisor that's constantly checking in on you and sort of doing like progress reports and like, okay, you're doing good at communication here, you're not doing good at like time management here. And so like having that structure is amazing. And it really like made me reflect a lot on like where my weaknesses are and where my strengths are. And those were things then that like I brought directly into like I did clinic my fall 2L year, and then I had a job application in January, and I went in and just crushed it. And so many of the skills that I learned in clinic of just sort of like that experience of working in like a supervisor relationship with other people on legal issues, I felt really confident going into the meeting and got the job, and it was a great experience for me. So, and the great thing about clinic too is that master's students can also do it. So master's student can sort of have this like simulated law firm experience without necessarily having a JD, which I think is also probably like a very helpful experience for anyone that's like graduating from the master's program because they have like clinical experience as they're about to graduate, which is super valuable in like a 1-year master's program.
Exactly. And we have a dedicated career service counselor for our master's program. Olivia, have you been working with them?
Yes, I actually just met with her earlier this morning, talking about some career stuff and planning for our summer courses. So yeah, the career services people, even just for the master's students, have been fantastic. They're super easy to make appointments with, and they really get to know you and specifically what you're hoping to get out of the program and what you hope to do after. And so I've had a couple meetings with Monica Collins from Career Services about that. And after that, we've kind of identified what I want to do, where I want to look for jobs and stuff. And then they've been really great just sending me emails whenever relevant job postings come up and stuff like that. So they've been super helpful surrounding all of that. They were really helpful. They'll help you redo your resume, send any professional correspondence like that. They're super helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. All right, I think we're winding down, but Laurie, can you touch a little bit on the LLM program in food and agriculture? The typical cohort size, it tends to be smaller. It's our post-JD community.
Yeah, our LLM cohort is pretty small. I would say, God, I don't know. Specific to food and ag, we might have like 3 students a year. Overall, the LLM cohort, I think, is around like 15 to 20. And the food and ag LLM students wind up becoming part of that larger cohort. In terms of like career outcomes, they have done really well. I mean, I think they have at least, Carrie Scrufari, who now is James, but I still think of her as Carrie Scrufari. She was an LLM. Her dream was to work at FDA, and she now is in the Office of Chief Counsel and has an unbelievable job, which was like her dream. Esther Acqui, who just graduated from the LLM program in May, but she was still with us over the summer for a bit. She got a job at the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic to continue on working on policy, and is helping to supervise students now. I'm trying to think of who some of our other Kendall's another LLM, although I don't think he's graduated yet. But for the most part, I would say the LLMs they've been really successful at being able to get jobs, and they've gotten jobs that they're super excited about. So most importantly, that they're super excited about. And we work really hard with students to try to make sure that they're like finding a job. I just met with Lauren the other day to talk about different job opportunities, and was like, I'm going to ask everybody I know to see what I can find out about jobs. So that's a big priority for us, in addition to career services, for us to be thinking about how to help you all get jobs when you're graduating.
Thank you. All right, I think everybody's putting their emails in the chat. There was one last question about CBD and cannabis and food. I think, would you just quickly, I know I was like, I want to know.
I didn't see the specific question about it, but we certainly cover that, or will cover that in my class towards the end of the semester, when we start to talk about dietary supplements and CBD as a dietary supplement and how it's regulated by FDA. And also THC, which actually is both of those, CBD and THC, are active ingredients in prescription drugs. So FDA regulates both of those, which I don't think most people know. Interesting that they're the agency that regulates them. And I know that there is, on the restorative justice side, Bobby Sand and I have been talking a bit about trying to think of what a cannabis law course could look like if we were to build a cannabis law course. We obviously focus on it on the food side, and I focus on it from the regulatory side. But there's so much that's happening with legalization in certain states, and like, what does legalization mean about equity, and how are people trying to incorporate equity into the laws that are legalizing sale and use. And so I know that those are issues that we're all kind of thinking about, and trying to think about how to build more curriculum and project opportunities around.
Thank you. Wow, this is really interesting. I love the food and ag department. Thank you all for joining us today. And I hope, someone had asked about in-person classes. Currently, we have a few residential for our 1Ls, and each semester we determine, okay, how safe are we to open? So I think our end goal is, yes, to return to in-person. I think there'll always be some type of virtual component now, though, who knows? But our goal is, my goal is, I love going to CAFS after a potluck because they have the best food. And I'm like, and when we were talking, you made me miss Donna, our cafe. Everything's sourced, and it's just a wonderful place. But thank you all. I'll let you go. I'll let you all go because you know me, I can chat forever. And if you need anything, I'll zip you all guys all have my email because I sent you the email for the link. But thank you so much and have a great day. Laurie, so good to see you.
Of course. Thank you all. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thank you all. Molly, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Molly's like the person behind the scenes that makes you feel, if she's on an event, you feel like calm, and then she pops everything quickly. And then I just feel like even if everything crashed, we'd be fine because Molly would be there. All right. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.